G'day guys! This will come as no surprise to you, but I absolutely love Bloodthirsters. They've always been one of my favourite things in the 40k narrative, and they've always been one of my favourite units to field in games of competitive Warhammer 40k. However, unfortunately, they haven't always had a very powerful and viable competitive profile. That's all about to change with the new Chaos Demons Codex. They've got a new lease of life. They've got a new data sheet which has got some really powerful abilities on it, some really powerful stats, and then they've also just gained access to a whole bunch of really powerful Warlord traits and really powerful relics. So in today's video, I want to basically go through all of that. I want to go through their profile, I want to go through the access of relics and Warlord traits and talk about some of my favorites, and also talk about some of the combos that you can use to make either a really powerful defensive Bloodthirster or a really powerful aggressive Bloodthirster. So with that being said, let's get straight into the video.
Walk for the Blood God.
Alrighty guys, I think the best place to start this video is to just go through the Bloodthirster's new updated profile, because there's a few things in here that change that make him significantly tougher and significantly more damage dealing than he was in the previous Chaos Demons Codex. So let's go through that together first so that we have a bit of an understanding of what we're dealing with, and then we'll talk about his Exalted traits, his Warlord traits, and his relics. Alright, so he has a movement of 12, weapon skill ballistic skill of 2+, strength and toughness of 8, 20 wounds, 8 attacks, leadership 10, and a 4+4+ demon save. That then degrades as he takes damage, so once he's got 6 to 10 wounds remaining, he'll have a 10-inch move and a weapon skill of 3 and 7 attacks. And when he has 1 to 5 wounds remaining, he'll have an 8-inch move, weapon skill of 4+, and 6 attacks. Alright, so straight out the gate, we've got an increase in the number of wounds. They've gone from 16 all the way up to 20, which makes them significantly tougher. Really, really powerful, and this combos well with some of the stuff we're going to discuss later in the video. So it's worth noting, 20 wounds is a big deal. The next thing that's a big deal is that they have a 4+ save against ranged and melee damage that cannot be ignored. So it's better than an invulnerable save because those ignore invulnerable save mechanics don't apply here. And it's also better than its previous stats because it used to have a 3+ save and a 5+ invulnerable save. Now, you might be thinking, well, a 3+ save is better than a 4+. However, in the 9th edition meta that we're currently in, almost everything is at least AP 1. So at worst case scenario, you're more or less going to come out the same. However, now, anything that has an AP of 2 or more, you're getting a better save than you were before. And this is really powerful because it's in shooting and in combat. So really powerful save, really powerful wounds. And the other thing to note here is that he's now toughness 8. They used to be toughness 7. So this means that anything that was strength 7 or less that's, used to be wounding you relatively easy is now going to struggle. Things that were strength 4 are going to struggle because they're going to be wounding you on 6s now as opposed to 5s. And things that are strength 8 are going to be wounding you on 4s instead of on 3s. So going from T7 to T8 is a really interesting break point because a lot of the main damage that you experienced in the previous sort of meta was either a bulk strength 4 or a bunch of strength 7 and strength 8. So this, all three of those, it effectively translates to a -1 to be wounded, which is a really powerful, and this is a really strong data sheet that I think we're going to see a lot of utility with. Now let's talk about his offensive output. So you have a few different weapon options here. He comes standard with Hellfire Breath and a Great Axe of Khorne. So Hellfire Breath is essentially a 12-inch D6 shot assault weapon with a strength 5 AP 2 and a single damage that automatically hits. So it's essentially like a heavy flamer. And then the Great Axe of Khorne is a big axe that gives you 2 profiles, a Mighty Strike and a Sweeping Blow. The Mighty Strike is going to be striking at strength 16, -4, D3 +3 damage. And the Sweeping Blow is going to be strength 8, AP 3, 2 damage, and you get to make 2 additional hit rolls with that weapon. You could then replace the Great Axe of Khorne with one of the following: a Blood Flail, a Lash of Khorne, and an Axe of Khorne. So basically the Axe of Khorne, which would be your downgraded melee weapon, would be striking at strength 12, AP 4, D6 damage, or it can do a sweep attack, sweeping blow for strength 8, AP 3, 1 damage, and you make 2 hit rolls. So you get a slightly less powerful axe, but you upgrade to an additional ranged weapon, which can be the Blood Flail, which is a 12-inch range, assault 1, strength 16, -4, 3d3 damage weapon. And it's similar to the Black Mace from the Chaos Space Marines book, where excess damage is spilt over. Or you could give him a Lash of Khorne, which is a 12-inch range, assault 6 weapon that's strength 8, AP 1, 2 damage. So you have a few different loadout options for your Bloodthirster. This is gone are the days of the multiple different data sheets. We used to have the Wrath of Khorne Bloodthirster, I think it was Unfettered Fury, and fuck, I should be able to remember the third one. That's embarrassing. However, there used to be 3, right? Now there's only the 1, but you have different options for how you can load him out, which means you can no longer take 9 Bloodthirsters, because you used to be able to take a minimum of 3 of each data sheet, and you could take 3 different data sheets, blah, blah, blah. Now you're limited to 3. However, you have a little bit more versatility with the way that you load them out. Now, my favorite loadouts are going to come in 2 different varieties. One of them relies on a relic, so we'll get into that later. However, I think in general, you're going to want just the Great Axe of Khorne and your Hellfire Breath. I think the additional ranged weapon doesn't offset the amount of damage that that big axe does. Having sweep attacks that are 2 damage a pop is really powerful, because it allows you to just cut through Marine or Marine equivalent armies with ease. And the D3 plus 3 damage is so much better than D6 that it means that you get a significant power boost against mech. So if you go into things like Knights, or anything that's like the Votann stuff with their new vehicle spam lists, all of those sorts of things, you're going to want that big axe. So I think generally speaking, you're going to want to go with the Great Axe of Khorne. However, there are some Warlord trait and combos with Relics that actually benefit from the other profile with the Axe of Khorne and the Blood Flail. So we'll go through those separately, but for now, let's just say if you're only taking one Bloodthirster, you're probably going to just want the Great Axe. Now that we've gone through the profile, let's talk about some of his abilities. Is the Demon Lord of Khorne Aura. So while friendly Legiones Demonica Khorne units are within 6 inches of this model, each time a model in that unit makes an attack, reroll the hit roll of 1. And he also has Relentless Carnage. At the end of the fight phase, select one enemy unit within engagement range of this model and roll 1d6, subtracting 2 from the result if that unit is an infantry character unit. On a 2+, that unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. So, not that Bloodthirsters needed 2 extra damage, but this is just a really good way of going, okay, cool. If you charge into a big unit of infantry, you get to do D3 and kill 3 extra models, up to 3 extra models. Or if you go into something that's got a really powerful invulnerable save or something like that, and you struggle to get through it, well, you can just do those D3 models on top. So it's a really good way to just round out that damage that this unit does in combat. All right, now, when generating your lists, you actually have an option to spend more points to upgrade your Bloodthirsters to Exalted Bloodthirsters. There's 3 different options here. You can only take each one of them once. So if you took 3 Bloodthirsters, you would have to take 3 different types of Exalted traits. However, I think there's a few real standouts here that you're going to want to take every single time. Some of them, not so much. So let's go through them together now. The first is called Indomitable Onslaught, and it costs an extra 40 points, which is quite expensive. However, if you take this trait, this model cannot lose more than 8 wounds in any of the same phases. Any wounds that are lost after that point are not lost. The second one costs an additional 20 points, and it says that each time this model fights, if it made a charge move, was charged, performed a heroic intervention this turn, then until the fight is resolved, add 1 to their strength and attacks characteristics. And the last one is Rage Unchained for 35 points, and it says that this model is considered to have double the number of wounds remaining for the purposes of determining what its characteristics are. Alright, so all 3 of these are very good. However, the one that I think you're going to want to auto-take every single time is the one that phase caps you and stops you from taking more than 8 wounds. There's a few reasons that this is really powerful. Some of them are obvious, but some of them are actually quite nuanced. So the first one that's quite obvious is that if you take this trait, you can deploy aggressively and your opponent is going to struggle to kill you turn 1, because people are going to struggle to do 3 phases worth of damage in a single turn from range. So This being that you have 20 wounds, which is why I said that that was important at the start of the video, means that it's actually going to take 3 phases. The first phase takes you from 20 to 12. They can't do any more damage. Then they need to spend another phase taking you from 12 down to 4. Then they can't do any more damage. And then they need to take you from 4 to 0 to kill you. So your opponent would have to do something like move up, do a whole bunch of smite damage, like doing 8 wounds in the psychic phase is quite difficult. Then they would need to do another 8 wounds in the shooting phase, and then cap you off with 4 in the fight phase. Or they could do it in a different order. They could go, okay, cool, we're going to move up, we're going to do 4 wounds in psychic, then we're going to do 8 wounds in shooting and 8 in combat. So it can be done, so you can't be too crazy with this Bloodthirster. He's not immortal, but you can be quite aggressive with him, and you have a lot of insurances there. So really, really powerful for 40 points. It's going to help you keep those Bloodthirsters alive. The reason that I say there's some more nuanced ways of looking at this Exalted trait is one of the biggest things that Khorne armies in general, but Bloodthirsters in particular, struggle with is opponents that can make you fight last. Now, there's tons of sources of this in the game at the moment, and the Khorne armies don't have any access to fights first, so they can't cancel this out. And basically, if your opponent has the ability to do this, they're going to be able to do a whole bunch of damage to your units before they fight. However, with this guy, because he's phase locked at 8 wounds, you could charge into something, they make you fight last, and you're like, I don't care, because you're going to fight, do 8 wounds to me, and then stop and not kill me, and then I'm going to get to strike anyway. So that's a really powerful way of looking at that mechanic, is that it actually allows you to fight regardless of whether your opponent makes you fight last. This is one of the really powerful parts of phase locked abilities, is that it prevents you from being fucked over by somebody else's rules. So that's really, really powerful as well. And the other thing to note with this is that, and we'll go through this later, there is a way to regenerate wounds. So if your opponent does 8 wounds to you, and then you're able to go in and do a bunch of wounds to them and regenerate 5 or more wounds, you'll then be able to put yourself back into them, requiring another 2 full phases to kill you. Or another 3 full phases, sorry. So that's really powerful, and it allows you to increase the longevity of these Bloodthirsters significantly. And if you're able to do that and then survive again, and then jump in and do it again and regenerate wounds again, you're going to make it so that this Bloodthirster just keeps on coming and is the gift that keeps giving. So there's a few things really important to note, but the Bloodthirster with that phase cap is going to be in every single Khorne Demons list, and probably most just Chaos Demons lists, because he's also a really good, as we've discussed, he's really powerful. He fucks shit up in combat. So being able to make a really tough thing that fucks shit up in combat, what list doesn't want that? So that being said, let's go through some of the Warlord traits and relics now and talk about which ones I like and which ones I think we're going to see lots of and which ones are probably better avoided. Alright, so Warlord traits first. The first one is Aspect of Death. So this is while an enemy's units within 6 inches of the Warlord, subtract 1 from the leadership characteristics of models in that unit, and each time a combat attrition test is taken for that unit, subtract 1 from that combat attrition test. Alright, so this is an example of a Warlord trait that you're just never going to want to spend the CP to get. And it's also worth noting that in the Chaos Demons book, there's only one way to generate Warlord traits, and you can only have one. So this means that it's not like other factions like the Chaos Space Marines or any other factions like that where you can spam Warlord traits and give one to every character. You can only take one Warlord trait. So picking the correct one for your list is really important, and it's definitely not this one. Alright, next we have Brazen Hide. Each time this Warlord would lose a wound, roll a d6. On a 5+, that wound is not lost. Alright, this one is a really good one, and this is one that I would consider, and this is actually one that I ran in my recent battle report with Bloodthirsters. So I think this is a really powerful trait. Being able to just shrug off those wounds means that your really tough model just got tougher. And with a 4-up save in combat and shooting that can't be modified, followed by a 5-up feel no pain, which is very difficult to modify, this guy is going to be really, really hard to kill, particularly given that his toughness 8. So if you want to make somebody that's just blatantly hard to kill, this is a really good way of doing it, and it's a really simple and effective method. Next, we have Devastating Blow. Each time this Warlord makes a melee attack, rules that ignore wounds cannot be used. Alright, so this one's kind of the other side of that coin. This one basically means that if your opponent has a rule like the previous Warlord trait where they can shrug off wounds, you can ignore it. In addition to that, if your opponent has something like a phase cap and say can only take 8 wounds per phase, this rule would ignore that as well. So this Devastating Blow Warlord trait makes your Bloodthirster an anti-Bloodthirster. He also means you're anti-Abaddon, you're anti-Catan, you're anti-Phoenix Lords, you're anti-Ghazghkull. All of these units that have that phase lock ability are terrified of this Bloodthirster. So that's a really powerful trait because there's a lot of units that have that sort of 5-up to shrug off wounds, so you get a lot of utility against almost every army, but you're also getting a very specific answer to a very difficult question, which is how does an army like Khorne Demons that's purely combat deal with something that can only suffer set number of wounds per phase? If your whole army does all of its damage in the melee phase, well, you need to make sure that if they can only take, say, Abaddon 3 wounds per phase, it's not going to take you 3 entire turns to do that damage. You need to be able to make sure that, well, we've got an answer to that question. So I think this is one of the best traits, and in a rounded tournament competitive list, you need to factor in how are you going to kill Ghazghkull if you go into him. How are you going to kill all of these various hard to kill characters? So I think if you're running a rounded competitive list, this is definitely a contender for that #1 spot. Next, we have Glory of Battle. Add 1 to the Warlord's attacks characteristic. While the Warlord is within 3 inches of 6 or more enemy models, add another 1 to the Warlord's attacks characteristic. And while the Warlord is within 3 inches of 11 or more enemy models, add 1 to the Warlord's attacks characteristic. All right, now this one's hilarious and very powerful, right? So basically it means if you go into a unit of 11 or more, you're going to be getting +3 to your attacks. You already have 8 attacks, so now you're up to 11 attacks. Then you can do a bunch of other things to get more additional attacks on top of that. So you can get this guy up to, I think it's about 15 attacks, and then you can use his sweep attacks to attack twice with every one of those, just putting out 30 dice with 1 model. So it's really, really brutal. That being said, I don't think you're going to be using your Bloodthirster to clear out your enemy horde. I think the Bloodthirster is mainly going to be there for killing big things and characters and elite infantry. So with that being said, I don't think this Warlord trait's particularly useful. All right, next up we have Immense Power. Each time this Warlord makes a melee attack, add 1 to the attack's wound roll. All right, once again, this is really powerful. It's going to mean that you're going to be hitting things at strength 16 with +1 to wound. So ridiculously powerful. Like that's wounding anything in the game on a 2+, pretty much. That being said, you're already wounding almost everything in the game on a 2+. Anything that's toughness 8 or less, you're wounding on a 2+. So we are starting to see a little bit more toughness 9 things. The Votann have it, the Chaos Demons can have it, even CSM Land Raiders are toughness 9 nowadays, and we're probably going to enter an environment where we're going to start seeing toughness 9 more often. And a standard Bloodthirster is going to be wounding toughness 9 on a 3+. So perhaps as that meta evolves, we might look into this and it might become a bit more relevant. However, as it stands, I don't think you're going to need it. I think you're going to be better off just going, well, he's already wounding most things on 2s anyway, and the few things that he's not wounding on 2s are generally going to be very elite infantry, which his higher damage is going to deal with anyway. So at the moment, I think this is a bit overkill. However, it's definitely interesting and definitely one that you're going to want to watch as the meta develops. And last but not least, we have Rage Incarnate. Add 1 to advance and charge rolls made for this Warlord, and each time a friendly Legiones Daemonica core Khorne unit declares a charge against an enemy unit that's within engagement range of this Warlord, add 1 to the charge roll made for that unit. Alright, so this one's pretty gimmicky, it's kind of cool. It basically means that if you charge your Bloodthirster in first, and he makes it into combat, then anything else that charges that same unit is also going to get +1 to their charge rolls. So, quite good. That being said, I think you're going to be better off going with something that's going to make you survivable and durable, so that you can make those combats, or something that's going to give you a particular edge so that when you do go into those combats, you get the desired result, such as being able to ignore phase caps and feel no pain style saves. So I think this one is cool, but I think this one's going to be one that you're going to prefer other options for. And the standouts for me are either the 5-up feel no pain or the ignore phase caps. They're the 2 strongest, and you need to decide which one of those 2 you want. I have some ideas on that, and we'll go through those at the end. However, let's skip over to Relics now and talk about the options there. So the first relic is called Armor of Scorn. It's a monster only, so each time an attack with a damage characteristic of 1 is made against the bearer, add 1 to the saving throw made for that attack, and each time the bearer would lose a wound as a result of a mortal wound in the psychic phase, roll 1d6 and on a 4+, that is not lost. Alright, so this one's really interesting because a lot of people are pivoting back into single damage attacks because of the prevalence of neg 1 damage, right? So all those 2 damage attacks are effectively going to be treated as 1 damage anyway, so why pay the premium for a 2 damage weapon when you can just spam 1 damage weapons? That's one of the things that we're seeing emerging in the competitive 40k meta at the moment. So this is really powerful in that environment because it means that you're going to get 3-up demon saves in combat and against shooting, which is a 3-up invulnerable save effectively, which is something that's very rare in the game right now. So that's really powerful. And also, that 4+ save against mortal wounds caused in the psychic phase is also really powerful because if you take that on the guy who's got a phase lock, now one of the phases that they need to do damage to you in order to kill you in a single turn is going to be significantly more difficult. So this is a very cool relic. However, it's not my favorite. I've got a few more preferred ones in there, but this one's definitely one worth considering, particularly if you're in a psychic heavy meta. Next, we have the Crimson Crown. At the end of each battle round, if the bearer destroyed any enemy models during that battle round, you can retain up to 2 unspent Warp Storm points. Alright, this is not very powerful in my opinion because in my experience, granted I haven't played many games with the new Chaos Demons, but in my experience, you're going to be spending all your Warp Storm points every turn because there's a few really powerful Warp Storm abilities, so you're just going to be spending them all. So being able to retain unspent points feels kind of bad, and the fact that it also relies on you doing stuff in order to trigger it just seems unnecessary to me. So I would leave this one at home. Next, we have the Rune of Brass. The bearer has the following ability. While enemy psychic units are within 12 inches of the bearer, each time a psychic test is taken for that unit, it suffers the perils of the warp on any dice that includes a double, instead of just a double 1 or a double 6. And each time that unit suffers the perils of the warp, it suffers d6 mortal wounds instead of d3. Alright, again, this is one that would only be really relevant in a psychic heavy meta. And the challenge I have with this one is that it's while you're an enemy unit's within 12 inches of you, right? But your opponent's psychic phase happens after their movement phase. So if you throw your Bloodthirster into the middle of their army, they're just going to move their psychics back so that they're outside of that 12 inches and then dump a bunch of psychic powers into you. So I think you're actually rarely going to see this be used in games, especially given that most damage dealing psychic powers are 18-inch ranges or more. It means that your opponent's just going to stay out of that range, and it's going to be very difficult for you to get in that range. So I think this should have been maybe a 24-inch range, would have made it a little bit more relevant. But unfortunately, given the fact that it's specifically tailored against psychic armies, and psychic armies have a pretty good way of avoiding its effects, I think this is one that you're going to avoid, and you're just going to not spend the command points on it, to be honest. All right, next we have Argath, the King of Blades. So you select one melee weapon that the bearer is equipped with, you add 1 to the damage characteristic of that weapon, and each time the bearer makes a melee attack with that weapon, you can ignore any and all modifiers to that attack's hit roll and any or all modifiers to its wound roll. That weapon is now considered to be a relic for all rules purposes. All right, this one is really, really good. So first of all, adding 1 to the damage characteristic is sick because now it means that those sweep attacks with your Great Axe of Khorne become damage 3. And strength's fucking ace, so they're really good at killing Terminators and those sorts of things. And also, the fact that it ignores hit and wound modifiers means that if your opponent's like, oh, I'll just do like lightning fast reflexes or whatever, you're just like, nope, I don't care. You know, if your opponent's got some ability to make you negative to hit, you're like, nope, don't care. And if your opponent has something like the Black Rune of Damnation, where they think they've created this unkillable Terminator unit, this guy just goes in and laughs. He's just like, well, lol, what a meme. I just killed all your Terminators in one phase. This is an interesting example of one of the things that I find particularly challenging with 40k at the moment, where they release the Chaos Space Marine Codex, they put the Black Rune of Damnation in there on the Terminators, and the internet shits the bed like, oh my god, this is the most broken thing ever. And then literally weeks later, they release something else that perfectly counters it. So everyone runs out and the meta adapts to this, and then it's immediately invalidated by this. You can't run bulk Chaos Space Marine Terminators in a meta where these fucking Bloodthirsters are running around, because they just laugh at you as they just kill your entire fucking, 600 point investment, because you got the unit and the characters and all of the relics and the CP that you've spent pre-game. All of it's worth nothing when you face Khorne demons. So that's really disappointing. However, it's worth noting that that's why we're talking about this relic right now. That's why this relic is so powerful, because it means that you're going extra damage, you're ignoring their wound modifiers, you're ignoring any hit modifiers, and you're just fucking killing things. So it's also worth noting this is really good, obviously, into big things as well, because that D3 plus 3 becomes D3 plus 4, which is obviously a lot of damage. So this guy can go in and he can one-shot a knight, he can one-shot Abaddon, he can one-shot Terminators. He's a problem solver. Whatever your opponent has that you're concerned about, you can just go in and go, dead. Alrighty guys, the next relic that we need to talk about is the Blood Drinker Talisman. Each time the bearer fights, after resolving its attacks, roll 1d6 for each enemy model that was destroyed by those attacks. On a 5+, the bearer regains 1 lost wound. The bearer cannot regain more than 6 lost wounds in each fight phase. So this one's really interesting, and it pairs well with the phase cap, because you're able to go in there, deal damage, regenerate those wounds, and hopefully bring yourself over that cap. So if your opponent's first turn, they bring you down below 16 wounds, meaning that they're only going to require 2 more phases to kill you, and then you're able to, in your turn, kill enough models to roll enough d6s to roll enough 5+s to regenerate yourself back up above 16 wounds. Well, now your opponent is back to having to spend 3 phases to kill you. So this is a really powerful one, and I think in the experienced hands, being able to sequence these things and make sure that you're dealing damage when you need to, and that they're only able to deal damage in a couple of phases, means that you're going to be able to get a lot of mileage out of these Bloodthirsters. So this is definitely one of my favorite relics that we have available. All right, so the next relic is called the Skull Reaver. It has 2 profiles. It replaces an Axe of Khorne. Its Mighty Strike is Strength +4, AP 4, D6 damage, and its Sweeping Blow is Strength 8, AP 3, 1 damage. However, it has an ability, which is each time an attack is made against a vehicle or monster unit with this weapon, using the Mighty Strike profile, that attack has a Strength characteristic of ×2, damage characteristic of D3 plus 3, and each time an attack is made with its Sweeping Blow profile, make 2 hit rolls instead of 1. Alright, so what this does is it allows you to take one of the Bloodthirsters with the lesser axe, but the additional ranged weapon, and then upgrade that axe to have a very similar damage output as the big axe. So it allows you to kind of have the best of both worlds. And I think this is really relevant because that Blood Flail that does the 3d3 damage that spills over is really powerful, because it allows you to deal with big things by going cool 3d3 damage, doing an average of 6, that's really cool. But also dealing with small things like going, oh, 3d3, cool, that's 6 dead Gaunts or 3 dead Marines or whatever it be. That's a really cool thing to have access to. So being able to have that whilst simultaneously having the scarier version of the axe is pretty cool. That being said, this would be, if I took it, would be my second Bloodthirster. I think the first Bloodthirster is going to want the other option. All right, now let's talk about some combos. I think there's 2 ways to look at the Bloodthirster. You can either run the one that's really defensive and leverage the fact that he already has a lot of innate power in his datasheet, or you can run one where you've prioritized aggressive damage output and lean on the fact that he's already T8 with a 4-up save against all kinds of damage, and he's already quite tough. So basically you want to leverage one of these 2 things, and I think in a lot of lists you're going to want to consider taking both of these guys. Now, as I said earlier, you can only take one Warlord trait, so you're not going to be able to take both of these guys in their full form. However, I think you're going to just sort of decide on your meta which one of these guys you want to take, or which version of each you want to take. However, let's talk about the defensive guy first. All right, for the defensive guy, you're going to want to take the Brazen Hide as your Warlord trait. This gives you the 5-up Feel No Pain save to prevent those wounds from getting through, which gives you some pretty solid defense against psychic damage, or if they're dropping mortal wounds on you in the movement phase or something like that, which is going to reduce their ability to take wounds off you in any given phase, which means those phase cap is going to get a lot more value. And then you're going to want to support this with the Blood Drinker Talisman, so that even when they do manage to get through your demon save, they're going to get through your Feel No Pain save, they're going to start chipping those wounds into you, you're probably going to have an easier time regenerating those wounds than they had dealing them, which really does make this guy almost unkillable in a lot of matchups, and he's going to do a lot of damage. So this is my defensive Bloodthirster archetype, and I think this one's probably the most powerful. However, let's talk about the other one, his brother-in-arms, the aggressive Bloodthirster. Alright, for the aggressive Bloodthirster, your Warlord trait is going to be Devastating Blow. Now this one is really, really important in a meta where we see emerging characters with phase lock abilities and other Bloodthirsters, things like that. And this is the one that allows you to ignore all that shit. They ignore the Bloodthirster's phase cap ability, they ignore the Catan, they ignore the Phoenix Lords, they ignore Ghazghkull, they ignore Abaddon, and I'm sure more and more of those rules are going to start coming out. So being able to just ignore them makes him really powerful, and he solves a particularly challenging question that is posed to Khorne armies. So that's your Warlord trait, and I think that's a very strong way to start. Now let's talk about his Relic. And for his Relic, I think you want Argath, the King of Blades, because being able to go through and ignore those hit modifiers, those wound modifiers, and being able to do an additional damage with every strike means that when you do go into those tough units, you're going to have an even easier time killing them, which means you're going to be able to spread your damage out a little bit more, and you're going to really be able to put that final nail in the coffin of that challenging thing that you're trying to kill. So I think you combine that with the ability to ignore their phase locks and ignore their Feel No Pains, and you have a Bloodthirster that can kill almost anything. He's a real scary monster on the table, and I think he's going to be a really competitive choice as well. So you've got two options. You've got the aggressive Bloodthirster and the defensive one. You could take a hybrid of the two, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. So for example, you could take the Devastating Blow so that you can deal with those phase lock characters, but then take the Blood Drinker Talisman so that you can also regenerate wounds. That's an option as well. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, what Bloodthirster loadout you think is particularly powerful, and whether or not you think I've missed anything here. I plan to run multiple Bloodthirsters, so I'll be running as many of these options as I can. So we'll see how that goes, and I'll definitely keep you guys up to date. And I hope you enjoyed this video. So make sure to like, subscribe, all that shit. Check me out on Patreon. You're sick of me saying it. I'm sick of saying it. So just sign up and then I won't have to say it anymore. Cheers, guys. See you in the next one.
Walk for the Blood God.
How you going, guys? Dean from Blog for the Blood God here, and I am proud to announce that we are finally available to support on Patreon. My Facebook page and YouTube channel have always and will always remain completely free. However, what is not free is the equipment and programs required to make content like this. So if you'd like to show some support for the work that we do here, please jump over to Patreon, sign up, and show us some support. With your support on Patreon, we're going to be able to continue to produce and increase the quality of our battle reports, tournament coverage, Tactica videos, painting tutorials, and other 40k hobby related material. With Patreon tiers starting as low as $1 Australian per month, which is fuck all, you will be able to show your support, and believe me, every dollar counts, it all adds up, and it will allow us to continue to increase the quality and bring you guys the content that you guys love. For the low price of $1 Australian per month, you can become one of my Renegade Astartes. For an extra dollar, I'll upgrade you to an aspiring champion. If you're really keen, for $3 per month, you can become one of my Khorne Berserkers. And for those of you who want to really dig deep and show your support for this channel, for $5 Australian per month, you can become one of my Skull Champions. One of the main reasons for starting this exciting new Patreon account is so that we can get some support and work on some exciting big new projects. These projects include a whole host of new battle reports, both narrative and tactical, strategic, competitive 40k battle reports. In addition, we are working on a brand new apparel line with a whole ton of different designs, and we're partnering with a few different suppliers to work on neoprene objective markers. All of this will be first available to our followers on Patreon, and then down the track available to people who follow us on YouTube and on Facebook. So if you want early access to these things, make sure you jump onto Patreon and show your support. Alright, that just about sums it up, guys. If you've ever enjoyed any of the content that I've put out for free, please feel free to jump over to Patreon and show your support. That support will go a long way to making sure that we can continue to produce better and bigger content every single year, and we are never going to stop, and we will never force people to pay. So if you've ever gotten anything out of a battle report, if you've ever learnt something from a list breakdown, if you've ever learnt anything from a Tactica video, or if you've ever just enjoyed having my content on in the background while you do some hobby, please show your support and join us on Patreon. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and I'll see you next time.
One for the blood god.